Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
30 prominent Americans asked, what do you consider to be the most important event in the history of the world? As a group, they rated first the discovery of America by Columbus. The birth of Jesus tied for 14th with the invention of the Wright brothers.
Joining Father Bacik in today's reflections are Father Richard Feigenbaum, college counselor and advisor at St. Francis de Sales High School in Toledo, and executive producer Mary Beth Kirchner.
Jesus didn't make that kind of distinction. Jesus says you are to love all people, you are to love your enemies. Doesn't matter what kind of enemy it is. It's an across-the-board kind of statement.
Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of civil religion. Here's Father Bacik.
Now, I'm interested in this problem of how we live out our religious existence here in the United States. I mean, concretely, from my perspective, it is how do we live as Christian people in the culture that we have in the United States here. In order to think about that, we have to have some handle on looking at the society in which we live. I have, over the years, found a lot of help in this notion of the civil religion. Actually, that phrase of civil religion goes back to the time of Rousseau in the 18th century, where Rousseau used it as a way of speaking about his ideal state, where the king would sort of set up for the people a generalized religion with a few fundamental principles of belief in an absolute being and a reward and punishment at the end of one's life, and so on. Fundamental notions that would bind all the citizens of the society together, and then you would then have your own private religious beliefs which would buttress that and would help you to become a better citizen. So the civil has been revived recently in our own time. A sociologist who had taught at Harvard for a while, Robert Bella, in 1966 wrote an essay called Civil Religion in America, where he borrowed that term from Rousseau and used it to try to understand what was going on in our American culture. And his point was that by analyzing the inaugural addresses of our presidents and looking at a lot of the public documents and the way we live our life through our leaders, he discerned a distinctive religion, a whole symbol system or interpretive scheme that is operative here in the United States. I mean, I think it's a fascinating notion. For example, he begins with the idea that there is this oppressed group of people living under a tyrant in Europe, and what do? They cross over a body of water, they come to a new land, it is the promised land, and they take it over, and they sort of think of themselves, therefore, as God's chosen people. Now, that all probably would sound pretty fanciful, except for the fact that throughout our whole history, our leaders have actually interpreted our public life in that way. So that Thomas Jefferson, in one of his inaugural addresses, said specifically that he was comparing the United States to Israel of old. It's interesting, when Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson were asked to suggest the theme for the seal, the official seal for the country, they came up with Exodus themes. That is, Moses taking the wand and parting the waters. And I think it was Jefferson then suggested that the seal be the pillar of fire that guided Israel through the desert. So again, an explicit reference to the Exodus. So they began to interpret our public life in that way. Now, when you begin to look at that religion, then, you see that it has certain distinct elements in it. One is the notion of the sovereignty of God, that God is in charge of everything. We get our rights from God. John Kennedy, in his own inaugural address, said something like, the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God, a phrase, of course, which reminds us of the Declaration of Independence. So all the way up to our own time, we see that same theme enunciated, that we are under God. God is running this country. The other theme that comes out in this civil religion is that somehow we in the United States here are God's chosen people. This is the promised land. There's been even talk about the second coming of the Lord occurring right here in the United States. You could look at more of those particular notions in the religion, but you could just see major things. Like we got our saints, people like Washington and Jefferson, for example. We have holy days, especially Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, our really national political holidays. We have on our motto, "In God We Trust." On the Great Seal of the United States in Latin, it says, "God has favored our undertaking." You see, we have all these elements which form a symbol system, a real religion, as it were, an interpretive scheme for understanding what life is all about and who we are as American people. It's really quite remarkable. Now, Bella's point is that this religion has a positive function, that it relates us to the Supreme Being. On the other hand, it's important for us to remember that this is not a Christianity. Let me try to just illustrate that for you. And the presidents light the Christmas tree and do it in an official way. Often that has been done without any reference to Jesus Christ. And just another example to show that civil religion is something different from Christianity. 30 prominent Americans asked, what do you consider to be the most important event in the history of the world? As a group, they rated first the discovery of America by Columbus. The birth of Jesus tied for 14th with the invention of the Wright brothers, which indicates that this primary value system that we have going here is something different from Christianity.
Father Bacik, do you think that this case of civil religion is something that we find mainly here in the United States as opposed to, say, in a country like Spain, which is a predominantly Catholic country? I know when I visited that country, one thing that impressed me tremendously was that there was that unifying factor of a common faith. Mm-hmm. Is it something that is very important here in this country because we are such a heterogeneous group of people? Mm-hmm.
That is a good question, and the example of Spain, I suppose, is a good one. We ought to talk a little bit more about it. But I think, first of all, it is true that all countries will have some sort of symbol system like this. I think you could probably say that all nations have a civil religion of some sort. That is an interpretive scheme which binds them together, gives them some coherence in their country. Now, the example of Spain, Mary Beth, that you bring up, allows us to perhaps nuance our understanding of what goes on in the United States. Now, in Spain, you had probably the last attempt in our world to have Christendom. That is the real union of the state and the Christian religion, where you did have a sense yet of a homogeneous culture. I know a lot of the conservative Catholic magazines, I think of Triumph magazine as one good example, often held up Spain as the model country, Franco Spain I'm talking about now, because they had integrated the Christian faith and the state. They worked together, and they had this sense of a unity, therefore. Now, in the United States, of course, what we have tried in some ways to have the separation of church and state. The civil religion, I suppose, has allowed us to do that in a way, so that Christianity as a religion is not established, is really not given preeminence. But the unifying force, or the glue that holds a society together, I think can be seen in terms of this civil religion. So our experience really would be far different from Spain's. And when I'm talking about that, it makes me think of what was said in the Second Vatican Council, where the Council Fathers said that there was a certain advantage in this separation, that the Catholic Church didn't need to have a preeminence in the country, but that all the Catholic community needed was freedom within a given country to operate and to live out the Christian life as they saw it. And the Americans had a lot to do with that statement, the document on religious liberty in the Second Vatican Council, where speaking out of our American experience and saying, hey, the church has really flourished here in the United States simply because we've had freedom. We didn't need any advantage. We didn't need any help, just the opportunity to live our life as we know it. So Spain seems to me to represent quite a different blend of a civil religion a different, very different situation from our own, but it helps to highlight the way it works for us, I think.
Don't you think, though, that there's a group or a particular sect that sets the precedent? For instance, I'm thinking in our own country of our beginning with the Pilgrims. They were a particular Protestant sect. Don't you think that has strongly influenced the direction that our civil religion is taking?
Well, it certainly has influenced the whole feeling in the country, hasn't it? The Calvinistic Reformed branch of Protestantism has been the dominant force. There's no doubt about that. And I think many authors claim that it is the real shaping force upon the American psyche. I'm not sure, though, that has dominated this civil religion. The civil religion seems to me to be another component in the mix that we find within ourselves. In other words, we're all a product of many forces, right? I mean, we can just think of some of them. We're a product of this civil religion. We're a product of our own ethnic and religious background, right? We're the Protestant, Reformed type of Protestantism, at least, has been a big factor. Our family, our neighborhood. So I see all of us as individuals having a lot of input into our psyche, and I think we get a different mix within it. Now, I see that this civil religion as being a distinctive thing from the Reformed Protestant tradition. And again, I go back to buttress that point by saying it really is something different from the Christianity that would be given to us by Protestantism, where you would have so much emphasis on the lordship of Jesus. You have to remember that Jesus plays no real role in this civil religion. He's not mentioned ever in the inaugural addresses, while God is mentioned in every one but one, I think. And this really is not Christianity. Let me just highlight that again. I take some of these ideas from a book by Will Herberg, Protestant, Catholic, and Jew. It's a classic study of American culture from religious setting. And I don't know if I'll get the statistics here exactly right, but when Americans are asked if they should love their enemies or their opponents, and they are said, well, now suppose this is a business adversary. How many of you Americans think that you should love that person? And something like 75% of the people will say, yes, I really think we should do that, or I should try to do it. If you change the question and say, should you love an enemy of the country? It's not a business adversary now. It's a adversary in relationship to our nation as a whole. That figure will drop from somewhere around 70-75% down to 25%. Now, of course, in a strict Christian understanding, that wouldn't happen, would it? Jesus didn't make that kind of distinction. Jesus says you are to love all people, you are to love your enemies. Doesn't matter what kind of enemy it is. It's an across-the-board kind of statement.
You mentioned earlier that, from your point of view, Jesus Christ did not have centrality in terms of the civil religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if perhaps it's not so much the figure of Jesus Christ as the Messiah leading the nation, but I wonder if, and this goes along with some contemporary authors and critics of United States history, perhaps the United States has a Messiah complex.
Yes.
In its posture in world politics.
Right. That surely is one of the things that grows out of this, isn't it? When people begin to reflect on the civil religion and try to see the negative side of it, which I think is there, becomes the major point, I think, that there is the sense that we were to spread what we have. It's the Isaiah theme of the light of the nations. And put in secular terms, Walter Lippmann, among others, has talked about it as the world policeman idea. We have the job of straightening everything out in our world. I often think of Lyndon Johnson's biographer. I think his name is Goldman, and he wrote that when Lyndon Johnson was vice president and visited Vietnam, while he was over there, he had this amazing dream of planting the American way of life over there in Vietnam. He saw this tremendous potential. And you can see the altruism in this. And I tend to believe that really was true. That he saw, boy, we have this great thing in the United States. We could put it over there. And they could have then the standard of living or the equality, the democracy that we have. So that would be an example, it seems to me, of this Messiah complex at work. We have to spread it. Another thing happens with that is that we then are always the good people versus the bad people in the world. we are the chosen people, and we go to the bargaining table with clean hands. We saw this in the Cold War period and the McCarthy era, really in an intensified way, where you had to be very anti-communist to be correct politically. There was this, of course, all the witch hunts and that went on with that. But the point I want to make here is that it sharpened this distinction that we were the good people and all the communists or the Marxists in the world were terrible people. And the only thing we could do is to try to get rid of them or to fight them. So that again, I see as part of this chosen people Messiah complex. You notice, I think of Abraham Lincoln, who had a very fine religious sensibility, although he didn't belong to any church. I think it was Reinhold Niebuhr who said he had finer religious sensibilities than anyone else at his time. And Lincoln used the phrase that we were an almost chosen people, meaning that he relativized that notion. Lincoln had a sense of the fact that we were not perfect as a people. He used that other phrase too. The question really isn't, is God on our side? The real question for us is, are we on God's side? Which you see begins to change our attitude as a people. But Rich, I think you're right in that, and seeing that as a potential negative side of the civil religion. And of course, when you're a powerful country and you decide you're going to export your ideas or your values, then you have the real chance of doing it.
I'm thinking of a really historical parallel. You know, we talk about civil missionaries for the civil religion, and I can think of the spread of the Christian faith in what we would consider Europe now. The missionaries, the religious missionaries came hand in hand with the soldiers. And that when the country was conquered, the religion was brought in.
Or even our own country, right, Rich? I mean,
Right.
You think of the missionary effort there that worked that way.
And I'm wondering if perhaps maybe some of the less privileged countries of the world don't quite appreciate our civil religion, and they don't appreciate the form it comes in terms of huge amounts of aid and occasionally some show of force, some indication of that.
Yes, I guess it's disturbing to travel a bit and to see all those Yankee go home signs and wonder why we have this image of us helping all these other people in the world and being a generous country and so on, and wonder why people don't appreciate it. I suppose we'd have to talk more about that statistically. I know I've heard, it's in the back of my mind, that we really do not rank very high in terms of per capita aid being given to other people. And the perception, surely in other places, that very often our aid is tied to military purposes, or that we are in some way or another stealing goods from these countries. And so I suppose that's part of why we get this negative reaction among other people.
Father Bacik, I was wondering if you might take a look at how civil religion has had an effect on us as individuals, not only as a country. And that somehow I see the effect of civil religion in that, in a sense, it might have weakened our own identity as Catholics, as Protestants, as Jews, in that we've been able to escape from the restrictions of our own particular traditions to a point where we're as one as a country and tend to lose our identity in our own particular faith.
That's a good observation. I think that probably each person would have to look within themselves and try to sort out what the major influences are and what really motivates us. What do we treasure? Which value system do we really follow? That's probably what we would have to do. But I think that you are correct in saying that very often what it did was to water down the distinctive traits. We even have an image for that, and that's the melting pot. It's one of the ideas that all of the people from the various countries would come here and be melted into this common pot where there would be this similar value system. And I think a lot of times people were sort of embarrassed by this. They were embarrassed by their distinctiveness, their ethnicity, their particular religious background. And it became a matter of becoming a part of the super culture. I believe a lot of the people of my own age who grew up in ethnic families tended to reject their ethnicity. They wanted to become more a part of the general culture as a whole. and they didn't want to speak the language of their parents at home, for example. Didn't want to learn the customs of their own ethnic background. I think it's interesting now that we see a revival of ethnicity and greater interest now in recovering some of those roots, which I would think is a healthy thing. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether the melting pot is real or not. Andrew Greeley writes a lot of things which suggest that that is not a good image for either what ought to happen or what does happen in the United States. He claims that very often the ethnic groups kept their distinctive outlooks in a surprising way. It would be, I think, it's always difficult to know whether that is true or not. I mean, he gives us these statistics and so on that are supposed to prove this point. That, for example, I think that if you take three Protestant people and ask them who are their best friends, you'll find that 75% of them will have three other Protestants of a similar religious background as their friends, the same way with Catholic people in the United States. Their closest friends, most of their closest friends, are of the same religious background. This seems to suggest that the melting pot doesn't just happen easily or across the board. But your notion that there is a watering down, I think, is a real danger. I think to give up something of our distinctive background for the sense of making it in the culture as a whole is really questionable. There's another book written along this whole line by John Cudahy, in which he talks about the civil religion from a different aspect. He says that the problem in the United States is that the Catholics and the Jews have felt embarrassed about their religious background and have felt the need to tone it down and to become part of the general Protestant establishment in our country. He calls his book No Offense, meaning that people had the sense that I shouldn't give offense to anybody, that if I was too Catholic, for example, that would be an affront to other people, and then I couldn't be accepted in the culture as a whole. I couldn't advance up the economic ladder, for example. Again, Greeley makes the claim that there still is a lot of prejudice. We call that the nativist prejudice that is at work in the United States. So, well, I'm just keep talking around your point in many ways, but I'm trying to reinforce it, that there is the danger of a watering down, and that we would really have to be careful of that. I think it's to our own detriment when we do it, really.
You know, you would think that the longer a civil religion is in effect, that the stronger it would become, the more it would contribute to a sense of American values. But we see societal disintegration right now.
Yes.
There's a breakdown on all the basic societal units, the family, the respect for human rights. And I just keep on thinking of that very simple statement, the whole is the sum of the part. And I wonder if maybe having a general civil religion is not too good an idea, because our individual components are falling apart.
Yeah, first of all, that's one of the ways that I like to analyze what is going on in the culture. That is precisely the disintegration of the civil religion, that glue which held us together, which are all these notions that we are the chosen people, that we are under God's protection, that He's favored our undertaking. Well, given Vietnam and Watergate and our inability to handle problems around the world, then we begin to wonder about that. I think that a certain self-doubt sets in precisely at this level of the civil religion. And we wonder, can it really function anymore? And as you bring up the question, what is the substitute then for it? What is the cement for the society? What gives us our common values as citizens of the United States that we can rally around? It's interesting. Now we rally around the hostage question in Iran, for example.
Just bring that up. For instance, right around Christmas time, the most significant activity that probably people will look back on in 1979 is writing Christmas cards to the hostages at the United States Embassy in Iran. And I wonder if that isn't the secret, that the oppressed people flourish. Their religion, they have to turn to their religion, whatever it might be, in order to survive whatever the oppression of the moment is. And then perhaps, unwittingly enough, the crises that we're being handed by other nations will be the glue that binds us together.
Yeah, I think it does throw us back on the potential strengths of the civil religion. We really shouldn't miss that idea in this whole discussion of the strengths of the civil religion. It has been used, for example, to mobilize support for the Civil Rights Bill by Lyndon Johnson. It sets there as a tremendous dream for us of what we could be as a country. Let's not forget the civil religion says that all men are created equal and that we should have a society of justice and that we should enter into fruitful partnership with other countries. That all of that seems to have a great potential for good. The question is, will that function for us in this positive way in the days ahead? Can we gather around it? I think, too, that the point that's been beneath the surface all along here is the importance of our distinctive religious outlooks, the Jewish faith, the Protestant denominations, the Catholic outlook, that we need to find strength in that. And we need to have a country where pluralism is celebrated, where diversity is seen as a good thing, and where we are not embarrassed by our particular religious identities, and yet we can function harmoniously in this society as a whole. And I still would hold hope that the civil religion could function that way for us, especially with its lofty notions of the sovereignty of God, that we really are all under God's care and His protection. So civil religion, I think, helps us to identify ourselves as individuals, to know what makes us tick, and I think it still remains a wonderful tool for analyzing our culture as a whole.